You know, I think half of the fun of character creation is more so less of the creative process, and while that is certainly part of it, it's the opportunity to roll more dice. I mean, this is a dice rolling game, and who doesn't like to hear whenever they get the chance? But there are a wide variety of ways to do character creation outside of just rolling dice, and honestly, there's a lot of pros and cons for both methods. So let's go ahead and talk about that today. Now the questions remain, why do these exist? Well, these are just flat out ways in which you can get your character ability scores. The ability scores determine by and large what your character is good at and, well, not so good at. Maybe they are absolutely good at everything, in which case, well, you probably have a cheater on your hands, or they're absolutely miserable at anything, which I would then probably suggest re-rolling or just creating a flat out new character. Because there is such a thing as a character that has too many flaws and, well, can't really contribute anything to the party. Because while you may like a lot of low ability scores and more or less just have your character be a brain in a jar, odds on favor is a lot of people are not going to like that. So you have to keep the others in mind, not just your own fun. But then, how do we get these ability scores? Well, in something like Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, there's technically 4...
3 shall be the number thou shalt count.
I mean, it's kind of 4, but...
4 shalt thou not count.
Okay, fine. 3.
5 is right out.
I get it. So yeah, there's technically 3 methods for getting ability scores in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. There's dice rolling, standard array, and point buy. Each of these has their own pros and cons, but let's go ahead and go through each and every single one of them. Dice rolling. You generally have 2 methods in which you can do dice rolling. You either have 3d6 or 4d6. For 3d6, you take basically whatever is rolled. For 4d6, you're going to roll all 4 and then you're going to drop the lowest. So for instance, you're going to roll a 6, 6, 4, and a 2. That gives you a 14 because you're going to drop the 2. And then from there, you're going to repeat the process 6 times in total. And yes, what I rolled here is actually what I rolled before recording. So already you can see that this is a decent character to start out with within D&D 5e. But there is another method for 3d6, and this one is typically more old school, where you roll 3d6 in order, which can lead to very strange outcomes. I also rolled these numbers before recording, and well, you can already see that this character is barely above a common, save for that 117 and wisdom, which means he's pretty much going to be a cleric, and probably just going to be a cleric that's going to hang in the back with that 8 constitution. It's a character that could theoretically work, but it's going to be incredibly difficult. Next is Standard Array. Standard Array is probably the most simple out of all of them, and in many ways 5e almost automatically assumes that you're going to use Standard Array. It basically gives you a set of 6 numbers, and you can arrange them in any way that you choose. This is very customizable and very new player friendly, and honestly, I would very much recommend this to a lot of dungeon masters to provide for new players. Give them the option if they want to use Standard Array, just so that they can get used to how the numbers work and then allocating them and really feel like they can actually make the character that they want to make. And then finally you have Point Buy. Point Buy is the one that is easily the most customizable for basically any type of character. You are given a set value of points that you have to spend, and you spend those points by basically buying ability scores. And you have a chart provided in the player's handbook. This is honestly probably one of my more favorite methods of character creation, especially because it's very customizable. You are not limited by whatever the dice or Standard Array provides you. You can really make the character that you want to make, and it really feels like you are making your character. The character that was up here is now officially coming to life through Point Buy. And there are other pros that come along with it, but we'll go ahead and get into those, well, right now. As with everything, there are a lot of pros and cons that come along with it. For dice rolling, let's go ahead and talk about the pros. The pros is that it really allows for a ton of variety within the character. You're not going to have a character with the same ability scores or a party with similar ability scores across the board. A lot of people are going to have wide variety in skills, which means that everyone is going to be truly needed. This is honestly a fantastic reason, and it can also give you a few low ability scores to lean into for roleplay. However, and for me, this is probably the biggest con against dice rolling, is that it creates a massive power gap in the characters. Time and time again, when I have done 4d6 stat roll at the table, I have seen one or two players just come out of the gate with 14s, 15s, and 18s, while another player is barely above 16s. And this is where you as a dungeon master need to figure out what you are going to do. Are you going to allow mercy rolls? Are you going to allow a character to just be completely re-rolled? Are you going to do something that I have seen dungeon masters do where they roll 2 sets of 4d6 and the players can choose the stats within it, and obviously allowing for DM approval first to make sure that they're not absolutely metagaming? Because the benefit of 4d6 is that you can really create a character that feels powerful and feels strong. That is part of the fun of D&D. But the downside is with 4d6, especially if you just do it straight, or even if you do 3d6 straight roll, is that it can create a massive power gap. So again, ability score does not equate good character. But it's one of the things of certainly one player can feel left out or feel like they're completely useless when one player is doing absolutely everything and one character is doing nothing or barely useful at their intended design. So this is something you as a dungeon master have to come to terms with and figure out what you are going to do in this situation. And we get to standard array and point buy. The cons for standard array is that it is honestly a little limiting. Pros is that it can really be customizable and, well, offer an opportunity for a new player to really understand ability scores and make it feel like they're making their character. Point buy, the con is rather obvious. It tends to lead to metagaming. Though the Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition point buy chart has done a lot in order to help mitigate that in many degrees. But for me, I'm one of the dungeon masters that honestly doesn't mind a character that is min-maxing. Keep in mind, just because a player min-maxes doesn't mean that they are a bad player. All that means is that they're just interacting with the game in a completely different manner than you enjoy. Anyway, that PSA aside, the benefit to point buy can also help out roleplay or more actor type players. Because think about it. 46 is rather random, isn't it? You may not get the character that you necessarily envisioned. But what if I told you there is a system out there that can be very customizable and use alternative charts to really get the character that you envisioned in your head? Well, you have point buy. Yeah, for how much we like to talk about roleplay and ability scores and leaning into those ability scores for roleplay, why don't we use point buy as much but strictly roll dice? I think I just answered my own question, but you get the point. Point buy really allows for a character to feel like they are coming into their own. It really helps feel like this is the character that you envisioned from the start. But also from a dungeon master perspective, it really limits the power gap, because even while someone may be quote-unquote min-maxing, the fact of the matter remains is that if they are really going to min-max their character, they're going to sacrifice a lot of low ability scores in order to get a lot of high ones, which means things will be mitigated out by characters that went for a more balanced approach. Everything is going to equal out in the end, even if you use modified point buy tables like I'm probably going to wind up doing for my future games. My all-time favorite point buy table comes from 3.5/Pathfinder 1st edition. Basically, you had actually a chart that labeled what type of fantasy you were going for, and that would really highlight what type of classes would be useful in that type of campaign. So already through your mechanics, you're setting up the tone and narrative of the game. The ability score cost would remain the same, it's just your point value starting out was going to be either incredibly high or very low. And in all honesty, I love this method. So if your world tends to be more low fantasy, you can use the low fantasy table. And then if yours tends to be more higher epic fantasy, you can use the higher epic fantasy table. It is a great way to get into the mind of your players before any dice are rolled on how the tone of this world is going to be. So yeah, those are my thoughts on ability scores and how we get them and originate them. There's a lot of ways you can honestly do it. If you prefer dice rolling, then have at it. If you like doing 3d6 in order because it's classic and you want that little bit of nostalgia, then honestly, have at it. Standard array, point buy, you love min-maxing, you hate it, have fun. However you decide to originate your scores at the table, honestly, just talk about it with your players. And players, be willing to hear out the Dungeon Master and their concerns for ability scores. Have a genuine conversation and figure out what would be best for that game. Sometimes a Dungeon Master is using this method in order to really help sell the tone and set it up for you prior to even having a session. This is a really good way to do it. And then, as mentioned, if you do have a min-maxer at your table, don't automatically assume that they're a bad player. Just because someone enjoys playing the game in a specific manner doesn't mean that they play the game wrong. Because honestly, that notion is really silly. Well everyone, that's the video for today. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed today's video, then please consider giving a like, comment, and subscribe. And comment down below letting me know the way that you get your ability scores at the table and the method that really worked for you. So until next time everybody, keep rolling those dice.